look at it, and he had it pretty.
Folks, if we can come back to our table, and we now have Katharine Worth, who's going to be coming to us by Zoom. Is going to be talking about speed resting in the island of Britannia. So let's give our attention to Ms. Worth. Thank you. Who will be with us momentarily. Is coming to us via Zoom call. She's Katharine Worth, and she's going to be speaking about speed resting in the Isle of Britannia. From England, yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, and hello everyone in the room. It's a great privilege to be talking at the symposium again. I look forward to talking to you today about today's presentation, Speed Resting in the Hands of Britannia, Empire and British Prestige in 1930s British Motor Racing. A couple of years ago, I presented at this conference, talking about the relationship between politics and 1930s motor racing. What mine and others' research has shown is this connection between motorsport and politics, but the question is often why? So George Orwell has penned a great many lines, but this one has always had some relevance to what I look at, and it's frequently used in the study of sport history. Sport is war minus the shooting, he wrote in 1945. In his essay entitled The Sporting Spirit for the Tribute, sport was argued not to be about promoting peace, but an avenue for generating tensions. In this sense, sport is a commodity. What was now considered by Joseph Nye as soft power, sport offered a nation a power and a prestige. So today's presentation will begin with a brief outline of the state of British motor racing in the interwar period. For the majority of this presentation, I will be focusing on British racing in the 1930s. Following this, we will look into the British Empire Trophy, looking at why it was formed and how Empire was embedded into the event. Importantly, how technology was linked to Empire. And lastly, we'll look at Richard Seaman and his perspective as a British driver on a Nazi German team. Linking these sections is the idea of needing to showcase British engineering in motor racing to bolster national prestige and status. So in the 1920s, Britain did have success in motor racing and motorsport. For example, Sir Henry Seagrave claimed the victory at the 1923 French Grand Prix. Seagrave and figures like Sir Malcolm Campbell attained land speed records, and the Bentley boys had great success at Le Mans. Part of British racing in the period was the formation of the British Racing Drivers Club, the BRDC. The BRDC were at the fore of British motor racing in the interwar period. The club was formed in 1928 as a social club that also promoted the interests of British motor racing. It was an exclusive club based on membership criteria of being a racing driver. This category was made purposely hard to meet by the founders. Members of this club were generally from the upper and middle classes, men with money who could afford to participate in racing. Now, I'm mentioning the BRDC as it was their ideas of how sport should be played, the behaviour of the members that shaped the British Empire Trophy I will be discussing. It was their roles in society, their upbringing as upper-class men, influenced how they saw Britain, the Empire, and the role of sport. By the end of the 1920s, the structure of racing had changed. The European Championship was formed in 1931, but by 1934, the event was reconstructed by imposing weight limits and competitive engine capacities. From the imposition of these restrictions to the start of World War II, each championship was won by a German in a German car. British constructors and drivers struggled to beat the dominant European teams, especially with the German, Italian, and French racing teams receiving government funding. With the rise of international competition from Italy and Germany, how did Britain respond? And why did they feel the need to respond? So one response was the formation of the British Empire Trophy in 1932 by the BRDC. So as we can see from the original minutes on the slide, the British Empire Trophy was formed as a response to a Monza-type event happening in Italy. So this is in reference to the Monza Grand Prix held on September 6, 1931. Now, it's unclear why the BRDC chose to copy an Italian style of racing. So one possibility is the structure of the event. So this event, the Monza style, was a heat-based system, which emitted different engine-sized cars to race against each other. So this style may have appealed to British perceptions of amateurism and fairness because it permitted more drivers with their own cars to participate in a race, and it supported this amateur racing that the BRDC and Britain was known for. Financially, though, the British Empire Trophy was not a success. For example, both in 1932 and 1933, the club's financial losses were primarily due to running this event. Yet, the BRDC chose to run this throughout the 1930s. Forming a race is one thing, but continually supporting an event despite losses hints at something more. The fact that it was this new European style of racing was probably the main appeal. It showed that Britain was attempting to keep up and even fit in with Italian and European styles of racing. So when the race began in 1932, Italy had dominated racing in 1931 and was in the midst of winning the 1932 championship. Given Italy's recent victories, Britain may have chosen to align with Italian developments to foster similar successes. This Monza-style approach also sought to draw in continental races, which would in turn increase spectatorship and add a glamour to British racing. This was an objective continued to be strived for in Britain over the years. So during a committee meeting in 1938, the BRDC reported its agenda to imbue British motor racing with a glamour seen on the continent. While records do not detail additional activities between 1932 and 1937, at the 1938, the BRDC highlight that a short history of the cars provided prior to the start of the race, a contingent of Sherwood foresters was present, and the Union flag was used alongside a starting flag. The inclusions of symbols like the flag and the Sherwood foresters may have been a show of strength and leadership rather than blatant expressions of military power. More potent expressions of militarism, for example, seen in Nazi Germany. So one historian has likened the German Grand Prix to the Nuremberg rallies, with the pageantry of swastikas, flags hung about the grandstands. But while fitting in with this European style of racing, there was a feeling of trying to be better than what was happening on the continent. This wasn't the British trophy, but it was the British Empire Trophy. It was that mindset that they have the Monza type event, but we as the British have something better, the Empire. So Empire became embedded into the event, attempting to add some prestige and value to racing. So invoking Empire at sporting and social events was not uncommon in 1930s Britain. Popular imperialism was evident in cinemas, literature, and school texts. We saw the first British Empire Games in 1930, and this would later become the Commonwealth Games. Empire was like the selling point, and reminders of the British Empire were built into this event. These reminders do not seem banal, as theorist Michael Billig would class, but purposeful. They were chosen and incorporated to invoke a feeling of British imperialism and pride. In 1933, Motorsport reported that Eppie Applewhite, the Brooklands race circuit timekeeper, had caused a sensation by holding the Union flag as a new starting flag. Originally believed to be a jest in support of the imperial nature of the event, the flag became an annual part of this pageantry. And as we can see from the program on the slide, there are hints of empire. One such is the image of the globe. You'll notice which countries are coloured in red. They are all sort of Britain's colonies at the time. On the program, you can also see Britannia. So now Britannia on that program is reference to the trophies from the British Empire trophy. So they were moulded as the figure Britannia, a female helmeted warrior with a trident and shield. She was a symbolic personification of Britain. Now, with the event structured around 4 different heats, each heat was awarded a separate trophy. These were the South Africa, India, Canada, and Australia trophies. Now, you also note from the slides that these trophies are only partial and smaller versions of the overall trophy. As you could say, these places, South Africa, India, Canada, and Australia, were only partial and smaller parts of the empire. The design of the winners' trophies sought to consolidate Britain's leading technological ability. The trophy has Britannia literally positioned on top of the world. She is holding a winged wheel, which in Greek and Roman mythology denotes speed. As such, this referenced Britain's leading global power and the idea that speed literally rests in the hands of Britannia. This symbolism, though, is defensive and aimed at to restore the status quo of Britain's industrial inability in the face of decline. This relationship between empire and technology offers one perspective on the why. Why was motor racing this war minus the shooting? For Britain, empire was emphasised as a validation for being a global player and the reason to be at the technological forefront. The reality for Britain, though, was that economic production was in decline. Her once image as workshop of the world was now challenged by the rise of America and Germany, and the British Armed Forces agreed that the nation's military and navy was overstretched. Discussed by the British motor racing community was this association between a winning car and international standing. As early as 1930, Sir Malcolm Campbell wrote an article for Motorsport that speed in the old days had helped forge the empire. Campbell believed that the British Empire had been mapped out by Britain's faster clipper ships, which enabled the capture of trade routes. The empire had been built and sustained by Britain leading the way in speed. But this was no longer the case. Campbell wrote that it's up to Britain, if she is to save herself, to hold and maintain the lead in speed. In 1931, it was argued that Britain was wasting money on land speed records instead of building a racing team to participate in European races. This was only 1 year before the formation of the British Empire Trophy. Maintaining this pedigree to Britain's European counterparts was fundamental, as motor racing was assumed to enhance the identity of a nation because of its correlation with civilization. As you can see on the slides, as Professor A.M. Lowe wrote in 1935, "Speed, the secret of civilization." So holding this power of speed was the pinnacle of progress. Speed by land, sea, and air was associated with the empire and sustaining it. There was this collective feeling in Britain and the motor racing community that racing was not merely a sport, but a national industry, which a nation's prestige could be displayed. So national prestige becomes a common phrase used in the 1930s in British press regarding motor racing. It remained undefined, but it seems to be the symbolic commodity that can enhance or devalue a nation's identity. So to rival foreign nations and bolster national prestige, Britain needed to enter events that met with the European standards. So in essence, so they could beat them at their own game. Thus, the British Empire Trophy enabled British drivers to dominate in considered a continental form of racing. So during the 8 races held between 1932 and 1939, it was won only by one foreign driver. So 7 races were won by Englishmen, and 5 of the 8 winning cars were made in England. The event operated as an opportunity to showcase British racing ability and technology. The British Empire relied on speed, and the British Empire Trophy provided an image of a still dominant world power. By the later part of the 1930s, as Europe edged closer to war, there was a greater stress on this. So the Motor reported, recent world events have shown, perhaps more clearly than ever before, the importance not only of being a strong and efficient nation, but also of taking every possible means of demonstrating that strength and efficiency, or in short, of establishing prestige. For Britain, there was a fear that she was unable to match Nazi Germany. Expressions of militarism are very common in motorsport. Technology like the racing car can easily be linked to mechanized warfare. So using soft power via events like the British Empire Trophy, there was an attempt to re-solidify Britain's international standing. In 1936, the British Empire Trophy was won by the BRDC member Richard Seaman. Seaman would later also become a British Mercedes-Benz driver, racing for the team between 1937 and 1939. Today, we're not here to discuss if he was a Nazi sympathiser, nor, unfortunately, do I have the time to go into all the details regarding his personal life and his career. But given his position as a British driver on a German team, he offers an interesting perspective, especially in the later part of the 1930s. In 1938, Seaman wrote a letter to George Monkhouse, a friend and a photographer. It reads, "I think some strong reference to national prestige should be made. This point is always rather laughed at in England, but there's no doubt that it means a lot more than we imagine on the continent. After all, England is becoming a pretty good joke, especially in the fascist countries, for our flannel-footed behaviour politically, and we are rather looked upon as a lot of decadent old women. A successful British Grand Prix team would be a very good way of dispelling this idea." So what Seaman is depicting in this letter is a very contrasting image of what the BRDC is trying to present through the British Empire Trophy. Despite 5 years of the British Empire Trophy, there is seemingly no progress, as from Seaman's letter. His letter states the reality of England's ability, one that is aging and decaying. Britain was now facing competition and witnessing warnings of a national decline. While racing could and wanted to be used for politics, there was a concern that Britain's reputation would be damaged because Britain could lose badly every time. And this could demonstrate the inabilities of British engineering in a period of growing international tensions. The loss of records and lack of victories meant that Britain's standing was diminishing in motorsport. Seaman's letter also points this unwillingness to reference national prestige in Britain. This is once again seemingly contradictory to the goals of the British Empire Trophy. In 1938, Seaman won the German Grand Prix in a Mercedes-Benz. As the magazine Speed highlights, this was the first time a British driver had won a continental Grand Prix since Seagrave in 1923. So 15 years had passed since a British driver had stood on this podium in Europe, but Seaman's victory did not receive the same attention as some of Seagrave's other achievements. For example, when looking at Seagrave's and his attainment of the land speed record in 1923 at Daytona Beach, he received a message from King George V, a knighthood, and over 3,000 congratulatory telegrams. Seaman did not receive this similar attention. Seagrave's success also came at a period in which England's core industries were stagnating or in decline. Driving a British-built car to success during this weakened industrial period, in Seagrave's case, provided a hope for Britain's ability that they weren't falling behind as much. Now, one could argue that it may have been the style of racing, Grand Prix racing versus land speed records. But could it have been that Seaman was driving a German car and he was promoting German engineering rather than British racecraft? Seagrave had won in a British-made car. So I began today's talk with a quote, "Sport is war minus the shooting." For Britain, This period of motor racing, this war was not a victory. While attempting to act as a validation for Britain's technological ability, the reality was a decline in Britain's motor racing prowess and an industrial decline. The British Empire Trophy had attempted to capitalise on empire and reaffirm Britain's technological dominance. It was an idolised and Anglo-centric event with their main aim of allowing Britain to win in motor racing. The British Empire Trophy never gained the same value as continental Grand Prix racing, nor attracted significant foreign competition in this period. And Seaman, he highlights the realities for Britain. One that is decaying, one that is elderly, one that, while recognised the value of national prestige, was reluctant to reference it. With the connection between civilization and motorsport, any shortcomings were witnessed as a sign of weakening British imperial power. It became essential that both British prestige and success was showcased and defended by every possible means. Ultimately, however, Britain could not match the continental teams, British prestige was not developed, and the lure of empire was not enough. Yeah, and that's it for today. Thank you guys for listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. That was fascinating. Do we have anyone in the audience have any questions?
Thank you very much. How do you, I mean, this was the theme of how the racing related to, British imperialism, projection of British power, and then so how do you relate the parallel developments of sort of out of the Union and Germany during the 30s, which were sort of running along a similar theme of a connection between nationalism and racing and a projection of political power?
Yeah, I mean, there is massive overlap in there, and I think so. In Britain as well, there was a big urge to copy Nazi Germany and what they were doing, and there was a lot of letters written between sort of British motoring magazines and Germany. I think for Britain, they realised that they could not compete with Germany and what was happening in Nazi Germany with the silver arrows and that Nazism that was developed and nationalism around it. And so Britain's hope kind of rested with ideas of empire, because empire was still a very potent kind of unifying nationalistic force that could rally behind and kind of hope, and they hope that it would kind of cover up, I think, a lot of the shortcomings of British motor racing. But there is a very similar trend regarding that nationalism. And I think it's also maybe a bit more, I haven't researched much into it, but quite similar to what's happening in Italy with the fascists, kind of, especially with going to like Northern Africa and re-solidifying the idea of Italian empire. So there's kind of, I think they're all on very similar lines. In that period, Germany obviously didn't have an empire in that time. So they're kind of, but it's all related to nationalism and trying to put for this idea of what you have and trying to rally everyone behind a very unifying idea. I hope that answers the question.
Hi, Catherine. Just based on the picture that's behind you, quite a lot of the 2010s was a British driver in a German car, and we see what happens in Italy when anyone in a Ferrari wins at Monza, and Charles Leclerc winning at Monaco this year as well. It was all. What role do you think that kind of national pride, and in Britain with British drivers and McLaren and so on, but sort of in general, do you think national pride still has a core role in international motor racing?
Well, that's actually related to my thesis that I'm currently writing for my PhD, which looks at British nationalism and motorsport up until the present day. So I believe there are still aspects of it, and it really depends on circumstance. And I think this is what I look at, is this different vectors of identity. So we now, in this motorsport world, we have so many different avenues of nationalism that kind of laid up on top of each other. So we have, like McLaren, we have an Australian driver in a British built car and all those kind of things. So at different times, different nationalism gets called up on. But I do think nationalism is still very prevalent in motorsport, and it will always be there, I believe, because you're identified with something. These drivers have their flags. They're known as a British driver or Italian drivers, Italian teams, and so forth. So there will be nationalism in the sport. Ferrari is an interesting one, as it is quite different and it's quite hard to study it, as it takes a very different form to what I think happens in Britain. But it is still very potent, and it is still very there, and there's nothing hiding it. I mean, we can just see Lewis Hamilton with the Union Jack flag at Silverstone this year. It was phenomenal hearing the crowd cheer, and you know that he's driving a German car. And I think it will be there whenever we go. It's not going to leave us anytime soon. Even in this globalized world, we still hang on to sort of references of identity. Yeah, but it's exciting, and it's unknown, and that's why I'm studying it for my thesis in a hope that we'll kind of understand it a bit better.
All right, Katharine, the chat online has sort of blown up a little bit, and I guess if you get back on the live stream, you can probably clarify some of these, but let me kind of take these as they come here. John Summers writes, there's a great picture of Seaman on the podium at the Nürburgring refusing to do the Nazi salute. The band didn't know how to play the British national anthem at that point. So that's his comment to what you were saying before, and it commented then. Jay Hungerford writes, do you feel that motorsports and nationalism still go hand in hand, or is it been largely privatized and left to industry to use as a tool to promote corporate technological advancement and global presence?
I believe it's still nationalistic, even with the sponsorship and commercialization of motorsport. I think when commercialization and sponsorship entered motorsport in kind of that 60s, 70s phase, maybe it did kind of dip a bit. But I think now, especially now, we're living in a world with the rise of nationalism, more nationalistic talk, more patriotism is being discussed alongside sort of the commercial side of things, that it is still present. It doesn't have to be hot nationalism, so to speak, what we see in the 1930s with Nazi Germany, but it can be banal reminders, as Billy would say. You know, these are flags flung about. We still sing the national anthem. Drivers still have references to their identity on their helmets. We still have flags on their racing suit. We still play the anthem of different countries we travel to. So I think no matter where we go, and with the rise of commercialism, there'll always be sort of nationalistic behaviors. I mean, look what's happening now with Franco and this Argentinian kind of group of people coming together and celebrating his like emergence into the sport. I mean, we had to see here in, once again, Britain, Silverstone and the British Grand Prix. You can't, there was so much sort of pride for Lewis Hamilton winning that, so that race here. So no matter what happens, with commercialism, it will always be kind of nationalism as well. Just maybe not as in your face and potent, but still kind of there.
All right, Katharine, one more, and it kind of dovetails into exactly what you're saying. Mario Teche writes, I agree that certainly sport sometimes is war minus the shooting, but he feels that in car racing, that real competition is pursuing the best possible. We've heard Mario talk about that before in his presentations, and he says this can only be done using other participants as a reference, while using each other as a reference together and not against others. Do you agree or disagree?
Please read the question again, sorry.
So if you've listened to Mario's presentations before, he talks about pursuing the best, and his reference point for pursuing the best is competitors versus other competitors, kind of statistically looking at them against each other rather than holistically looking at the race as a competition.
Yeah. No, I agree that, and I think that's what happens. It's, you know, it's a competitive, it's comparative. You want to beat the next person, as that makes sense. And I think, sport is war minus the shooting. I mean, that's penned in 1945. That's quite a while ago. But it is that you're always comparing yourself to a different, and that could be just an individual or a country. you kind of, it will be always compared, and always, you always want to put kind of your driver in the top, because it means something, you know. Britain wanted to have sort of a British driver leading the way because it meant something, even though it might have not been sort of compare, like, it's the same thing. It was a British Empire trophy. It wasn't a massive continental race, but it was, you know, it was Britain showing that it was winning at something, and there were kind of foreign drivers in it, but not as many as sort of Englishmen were racing. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Katharine.
I think.
Hi, Katharine. Thank you for that excellent presentation. You mentioned Henry Seagrave. He wrote a book called Allure of Speed, and you talked about the, speed equals civilization. And Seagrave was a close friend of Gabriele D'Annunzio in Italy, who was an inspiration behind fascism. So I'm just wondering, is there some link between, speed, civilization, and the far right in Britain at the time? I'm thinking of British Union of Fascists. We all know who Oswald Mosley's son was and what he became. So I'm just wondering if there was some connection.
I think there would be. So Malcolm Campbell was also a member of the Fascist Party, and I think a lot of just upper class British men were part of that group. So there probably was a link, but there's not much evidence, unfortunately, regarding membership to the Fascist Union, and it's probably not best to go classifying people as fascists without proper evidence. So there is some links, and I think it's part of that mindset, it's part of that culture of that era regarding sort of, rise of nationalism, rise of fascism. And with hindsight, it's brilliant. Of course, we now know what happened in Nazi Germany, but it's hard to think about what did they know or not know in that period of time. So I do think there are some connections and there's some overlaps, but I don't know the extent to which it was part of this propaganda of the far right and like the Fascist Party. But there are, significant linkages between both of them.
Any other?
Katharine, I remember in the 1970s you were talking about nationalism. I believe it was Lord Hesketh that had on his team and trucks and everything racing for Britain. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. I mean, there was always been BRM, British Racing Motors, ERA, English Racing Automobiles. There has always been kind of links between British motor racing and nationalism, and this idea of like supporting the nation. There was also, I believe I was talking to someone about it recently, sponsorship and putting money in towards developing English racing team. But even you look at what's happening in Scotland with the Scottish racing teams as well. So there've always been kind of up to the present day links between Stuart Racing with the Scottish like Tartan, Royal Stuart Tartan and things like that. There were always references to Scottish and sort of English and British nationalism in motorsport in Britain.
Any other questions? Thank you, Katharine. A round of applause for Katharine, please. That was very good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me again. All right. See ya. Bye.